I could probably it's probably worth going outside and showing you some of the other bits here.
Awesome, please, yeah.
So this is my normal habitat.
Uh-huh.
That's this is Real World Studios. That's the big room overlooking the pond,
Uh-huh.
and that glass is the control room
Yeah, magic. With the stream going through it.
with the stream going through it. Yeah, no swan today. The swan's obviously gone into self-isolation. Crazy.
So how are you? I mean, how is lockdown? Because you're in a nice area, though, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, you know, other than the fact that my missus is working at home and has been for 3 weeks, and there's no school, there's nothing dramatically changed
Same,
for us
yeah.
in terms of our day to day. Obviously, for me, I had a whole summer of stuff that was all in the diary that's now gone.
Yeah.
Like 5 months. I was doing an album in Belgium that's been delayed indefinitely, and we all came back. That was me, not Duff Junk.
Was it at the... Yeah.
So we were supposed to be doing that, and he's locked himself away. So yeah, I mean, you know, work-wise, it's been. I mean, I've got stuff to do. I'm thankfully I'm okay, but yeah, it's just a shame that I mean everybody. I mean, like the live industry is pretty devastated, really.
Yeah, it's screwed though. I mean, the live industry, and everyone's thinking, oh, bands, that's terrible, but no one's really, apart from us, you know, who actually know how it works. It's all the crew around it. You know, all the tech crew, but even like the venues and the busing companies and the audio companies. It's like, what are you gonna do?
It's pretty crazy, the impact, and you know, I suspect it's going to be a lot longer than anyone anticipates at this stage.
Yeah, nothing till next year, I don't think.
Pretty much, I think you're right.
Because even if you do get like a go-ahead, oh, you know, you can start putting shows on in October, could you imagine the amount of shows that are trying to be squeezed in before Christmas? People won't be able to afford to go to all of them.
And I suspect that they won't. I mean, I know that the Manics and Delamitri have announced kind of these shows for the NHS and stuff at the Motorpoint in Cardiff, and I just can't see it happening personally. I mean, I don't know, I have no insight, but I think it'll be a tough call. I think maybe a 500 cap venue will be the initial phase before you suddenly start opening up arenas and stadiums.
Yeah.
So anyway, this is all to unravel.
Yeah, well, exactly. So, I mean, let's just carry on. I mean, there's no point in me starting it officially. This is all really good anyway.
Oh, right.
So how, excuse me, how is the current social situation of CVD-19? So how has that affected your, apart from obviously all the live work you had coming up, how has that affected your sort of general working process or practice?
It's like, in a way, I guess, lots of people who do what I do are kind of ahead of the curve because we work in isolation normally. So, in a way, this is just normal service, really. I'm fairly used to being in this room, or another room like this, by myself, tinkering away, emailing files or doing some kind of live broadcast from my Pro Tools system, and having the clients at the other end commenting. So in that respect, it's you know, it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I mean, but that kind of fits in with because obviously you've done a load of work. Well, okay, let's introduce this Ali Staton, who is not only one of the world's finest band and crew day off tour manager, entertainment manager in the world, who was responsible for me completely forgetting an entire night out in Ginza in Tokyo until I got to sound check the next day and saw the photos. That's one of his jobs. His other jobs are engineer, producer, mixer, and also providing all the live tracks for big shows for artists like Madonna and which we'll come to in a bit. But you were just talking about sort of working in isolation, sort of doing mixes,
yes,
which may kind of fit more into sort of like the sort of one-off projects that you get, sort of like, you know, like a club track or a remix, or can you mix this track? But that sits completely in isolation from one of your long-standing relationships, which is Turin Brakes, who you have a much deeper relationship of recording things from the beginning through to the end.
Yeah.
Good. That's that covered. But how does that... I mean, they are two different ways of approaching, isn't it? Sort of working remotely to do a mix, then getting some feedback from the clients where they say, you know, oh, can you turn the backing vocals up? And you're thinking, no one will care.
Yeah.
Or whatever that might be. To then being in a situation with the same sort of tight-knit group of people, possibly in one location or maybe two to get it all done. That is a different sphere. And it'd be interesting for people who are watching or listening to this on a podcast, how those two things are different.
In the case of Turin Brakes, I've got to say, actually, I was thinking about this the other day, just because, you know, we're all listening to music in isolation and kind of thinking back about things we've done and things we want to listen to and books we haven't read and all that sort of stuff. And I was just a massive Turin Brakes fan from the outset, and happened to have a sort of connection to the band through the bass player. And so, you know, I was kind of on their radar, I guess, through Ed, the bass player, for a while. I seem to have long-standing relationships with bass players. Maybe you can expand on that.
Well, it's nice guys stick together.
Anyway, so they approached me to in 2013 initially because they wanted to take things kind of back to their first album, The Optimist, which is a really well-known record in the UK, and they had done that on tape, and they wanted to record like that and kind of experience that process again. And so because I'm old enough to have been around in the days of tape, when I started as a tape op and an assistant, that was still a sort of skill set, albeit kind of covered in cobwebs, that I possess to some degree. So we went to Rockfield and we looked at a couple of studios, but Rockfield seemed like a good place. And the reason I was kind of pushing for that is because I wanted a space that was kind of new to all of us. I'm based at Real World, which is where I am now, and you know, I live very close to the studio, and this is a very comfortable environment to me. But I was kind of mindful of that fact that we should all put ourselves into a really unfamiliar space, because that will effectively create a sort of
Hello.
Oh, we're back.
Yeah. So this is all part of the technology we love so much. So you were just saying about with Turin Brakes moving consciously, doing it somewhere that was not as comfortable, or moving into a different environment to do it.
Just somewhere that none of us could kind of fall back into, you know, your comfort zone, that it would stretch us all. You know, the room for me as the engineer was unfamiliar, and some of the equipment, and for them it was a different space, and we were all kind of, you know, essentially locked in together in this residential studio, away from family, away from all the sort of familiar things like, you know, your local pub and stuff. And there was a sort of sense that we would just be focused fully on the music, and having to stretch ourselves to find a way that would hopefully find its way into those recordings. So that was the idea, and it was all done analog. So we recorded on the Studio 24 track in the coach house at Rockfield. For that record, we actually ended up doing 3 albums at Rockfield over about 5 or 6 years, and all of them basically followed the same process. It was 13 days of tracking onto tape, all the edits I did on tape, and then finally on the last day I would dump all those recordings into Pro Tools because, you know, I would bring it back to Real World to mix and do a few overdubs and tweaks. So to answer your question, that was a very different process to, you know, this setup where it's just all remote. I mean, I love it. That's kind of why I got into being in a studio and being involved in musicians, with musicians and being part of that creative process. And also why I enjoy doing the gigs, which we've done many of and stuff, because there is exactly that same kind of thing. Although I'm not on stage like you playing, there is still a kind of energy, and, you know, my cock-ups can be fairly disastrous doing what I do in the live arena, although I get to hide off the side of the stage and not be visible in my stress of having to deal with things like that. But yeah, it's a similar thing. It's like being part of that creative team and having to deliver something at a specific point, whether it's a take or a performance in front of an audience. And so yeah, I love that's the buzz.
Yeah, and that goes to the core of the, you know, the human part of music, isn't it? So obviously in the studio you're operating with the Turin Brakes guys, they're recording, you're making sure it's all being captured, you've got your own ideas because obviously you've heard all the songs, you've done the pre-production, you've got the demos, you've got your own production ideas and where it could go, but it's everyone communicating. And then the live thing where you're running the tracks but the musicians are playing with them at the same time, everyone's at that same moment to make it work. And if it all kind of slips a bit, that's where it starts to fall apart at the seams, and then people need to communicate with each other or listen at the very least to each other to pull it back. Yeah. Which is what goes to the core of why we love music.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's it. You know, and in a way, although technology has kind of developed and allowed us to do all these incredible things, there is still something amazing and unique about that unspoken connection between people involved, irrespective of whether they're the musicians or the technicians. But when people are all working towards one goal, there is a kind of unspoken connection, and that's pretty special.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is what, you know, that's what marks things out. And I guess that's probably why, unless you're dealing with purely instrumental music, the main focal point for anyone listening to music, you know, music fans who may not have any understanding of what a hi-hat is or what a compressor is or even what a bass line is, it's the vocal, isn't it? It's that human aspect. Yeah. Even if it's auto-tuned and processed, it's still a human signal that's then been manipulated.
Yeah, that's kind of your key into, as a listener, into a song. You know, the vocal essentially is what draws you in, whether it's the lyric or the melody or just the emotion in the voice. It's all those things, and all enhanced by the instrumentation around that or supporting that process.
Yeah, yeah. And that process, just going back to the Turin Brakes things, like pretty much like this is 13 days. So we're going to track everything, have a day to transfer it all to Pro Tools. So it's basically 12 days of focus. Let's get everything done in a defined time period, which obviously then puts strict boundaries on what can be done and what, you know. Does that think that the fact that it actually cuts off options of time and being able to like go down a rabbit hole or a blind alley or something, sort of just to focus the creative process?
Absolutely, and also in the case of those records, doing it on tape, we were limited to, for the most part, especially on the first record, 24 tracks. So, you know, there was a degree of planning to make sure that we set up the number of tracks for the drum recording and the bass parts and the guitars and how many overdubs, and then the vocals, because vocals and vocal harmonies are very much part of their sound. Yeah. So there was a limitation in the format that we were working on, a limitation in the time that we had to do that. On the plus side, they are, you know, a band, a unit, and they're very used to, they do a lot of gigs and they're very used to performing as a collective. So all the takes were done with the four of them at the same time. Right. And that makes things a lot easier in lots of ways, because, you know, you capture the take that you feel that encompasses what it is that they're trying to express with the song. and then you're able to move forward relatively quickly onto other ideas on the same song or a different song entirely. So it kind of worked really well, having the track limitation, the time limitation, and the fact that they were a unit that were very used to performing. I mean, I think that's kind of a key if you're going to work with those boundaries. You can't really have someone who needs to have their performances edited together, or a style of music that needs to be constructed. It has to be quite free-flowing and be able to be performed.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's not going to work for everything. Like, for instance, like a Tame Impala record.
No, exactly.
It's a different approach to the same end process of creating something that resonates with people, but it's just a different way of doing it.
Yeah.
So how does the approach of that differ from when you worked with Tricky on the Maxinquaye record?
Well,
less drugs, kids.
It's a long time ago, and so my memory of it may not be exact. Tricky is amazing, but he's amazing because, and his strength is that he is not limited by those things that more conventionally trained musicians would be. You know, even things that you might take for granted as a seasoned pro musician, things like key and tempo and time signature, or all those sort of rules of music really don't apply to how he listens or how he creates. And so from my perspective, it was quite difficult because he would often come with a lot of vinyl and just start flying through, just dropping his needle down, picking out loops and sections and bits of music that he found interesting or as a sort of launch point for what he was trying to do. But quite often they wouldn't be in the same key or they'd be at different tempos or in some cases different time signatures, and trying to explain to him sometimes how that might not work with my sort of trained brain was limiting. And in a way, the best way to approach it, I discovered, kind of having to work with him over a period of time, was to let go of all of that and kind of go with his free-form approach. And that's kind of his strength. That's what makes him so unique, is that he's not limited by all those things that we are just used to kind of working to.
Yeah, well, that's funny because we do rely on things that we just reach for, even subconsciously.
Exactly.
Oh, it's 4/4, it's in E flat. You know, let's put a sample in that's in 3/4 and it's in G. You're like, what? And it's a different tempo. It's going to be some. We'd probably reject it or manipulate it to put it in the right key. Whereas obviously, he's probably got that approach from the old Public Enemy records, where it was a mismatch of the Bomb Squad, Chuck D, and Flavor Flav playing samples together.
Yes.
Just to create and maybe it's then that collision of surprise elements that
it is, and it's unique and it's amazing, and it's stuff that, you know, unless you're able to shed some of those, like you say, instinctive rules-based approaches, you can't really get into it until you're able to sort of separate those ways of working. So it took me a little while to grasp that, I have to be honest. And a lot of I came in on the first Maxinquaye record quite late. Most of it had been completed by an amazing English producer mixer called Mark Saunders. And so I sort of picked up the very tail end of that and mixed a few songs, and then did some of the newer stuff post that. So I mixed a few tracks on Maxinquaye and then some other stuff that was kind of done from scratch, including a session with the Gravediggaz, who were the sort of the earlier version of what became the WuTang Clan.
Yeah.
That was a session, a one-night session with Tricky and the Gravediggaz, including the RZA.
That's amazing.
Which was bonkers. It was arguably one of the most bonkers experiences I've ever had.
Was it very much freeform?
Completely freeform. And what was interesting is that it was one of those situations where the label Island Records was the label that was common between Tricky and the Gravediggaz. And I'm guessing, and I don't know this for a fact, but I'm guessing someone in the marketing department decided that it would be a great idea to put these two artists together neither of them knew each other. I think Tricky was aware of their work. I'm not sure he knew them, and I don't think were even aware of Tricky or who he was. Tricky being from the West Country, having spent probably a good part of his life looking up to American hip hop as being the kind of the source of gold.
Yeah, was
in both kind of in awe of them because they were effectively authentic.
Yeah,
and kind of fearful, bringing his kind of West Country trip hop, whatever name you want to apply to what he particularly did, and so there was an interesting dynamic between them. And then they just decided to freestyle everything, which was something he at the time wasn't familiar with.
Right.
He was sitting there scribbling lyrics down, and they were looking at him kind of going, well, that's not the way we work, we just freestyle this. And I think he felt compelled to rise to the challenge, and so it created a really interesting atmosphere, and it was my job to try and capture whatever madness was going on at this point, and it was completely random. Incredibly, they came out with, I think we did 3 tracks in we started the session at 10:30 at night at West Side Studios in West London, and we finished somewhere around 8 o'clock the next morning, and all on analog tape.
Yeah,
I think we did 3 tracks, and one of which 2 of which were released. I think they both ended up on The Crow, which was that sort of 90s kind of horror sci-fi movie franchise. And then the third one that was, in my opinion at the time, and I don't remember it because it got erased. They fell out. The 2 parties, artistic parties, fell out over the writing splits.
Right. And
then the RZA stood over me, and he's a tall man and quite an imposing character, stood over me and made me erase the entire multi-track. And so that track has never been heard. It doesn't exist in any shape or form.
Oh, wow. There's not even a demo of it or a rough mix of anything.
Nothing. He insisted that it was raised. I did, for a moment, it occurred to me when I was standing by the tape machine that maybe I can fudge this and sort of put the machine into a kind of rehearse drop-in mode so that it would look like it's recording, but it isn't. But he was even though, they're known for their habits, inclinations, however you want to describe it, and a night full of those inclinations, his focus was undulled, and he was very wise to my possible plan of trying to save this recording, and insisted that all the lights went red, and it's gone.
It's gone. That's an amazing story. Blimey.
Yeah, much to the annoyance of the label. Who, when I went into the label the next morning, and they were like, "How did it go?" And I was like, "Great. Can we hear it?" You can hear 2 of them. Well, what about the third one? Well, it doesn't exist.
So if you go and speak to RZA about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So
you deal with it. That's amazing. Well, that whole how did you end up working with Tricky in the first place then?
So I managed to get a job at Island Records studio when Island was in St. Peter's Square in West London, the kind of original home of the label. And they had an amazing recording studio that Chris Blackwell had set up in the 70s in the basement called the Fallout Shelter. And in the mid-90s, I was the in-house engineer for the label, which was, looking back, it was the most privileged position I could have imagined, and an amazing break for me to be within a label. It was still relatively independent at the time. It was part of Polygram, but operated very much in that sort of independent ethos. And we had an art department and a video department in the studio. And so lots of projects, especially new artists, were created and conceived in the one building. And to be part of that, to be working on the music in the basement, and then the artwork being done on the ground floor, and the videos being commissioned and conceived in the building, you really felt part of this whole process. And the Tricky album was basically just the consequence of me being in the right place at the right time. It wasn't nobody searched me out. I was the guy in the studio, and so it got handed to me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's funny you should mention that studio, because I did some stuff there on one of the second to last Ocean Colour Scene record when I was still with the band. I think we just did a whole bunch of overdubs there.
Yeah.
Did the backing vocals in the toilet, like
Yes.
Bob Marley. Obviously, all his famous post 73 vocals were done in the toilet
that's right.
to get that reverb sound. And we used the
It was a chimney.
chimney. That's right. Yeah, which then became a toilet, I think.
Well, there was a toilet at the back. The chimney was still there, had a little flap, and someone before me had put a mic up there, and so you pull the flap down, and the end of the XLR cable would drop out, and you could plug the connection in. And I think there was a speaker at the top of the chimney, so you could send the signal, whatever the vocal or whatever, up there. Yeah. And essentially used it like an echo chamber.
Wow, that's brilliant. So, but it's great, that thing you're saying about it all being in the same building. Because I was signed to them for a while when they were in that form, you know, when it was a major, but it was independent, you know, outside finance, but get on with it yourselves. To do everything in one building, so everyone feels connected. Again, going back to, without being too fluffy about it, going back to the Turin Brakes sort of thing, of that team working together. Yeah. No outsiders, you know, particularly within the process, because everything that needs to be done is here. That's like pretty awesome.
Oh, it was great, and you know, I probably didn't realise how lucky or fortunate I was at the time, but in hindsight, it was an amazing experience, and I was there for nearly 5 years, and Tricky and some Polly Harvey stuff with John Parrish, and an artist who's kind of not as well known, but a guy called Lewis Taylor. I did his records there, and they were all artists signed to the label. So effectively, I worked exclusively for Ireland during those years.
That's amazing. Great. So why did you leave? Unless it was like a political thing.
No. They were amazing. It came to a point where I think the Tricky album was maybe the launch point, and then other labels started to approach me.
Right. Okay.
And the studio came under the sort of control of the A&R department, and they very kindly used to let me go off to do records for other labels. So I think the first one that I did like that was a band called Lamb. I went off to Ridge Farm to do that record for Mercury, and I think I had like 4 weeks or 6 weeks of unpaid leave to go off and work for another artist, another label. And that happened about 2 or 3 times in a year. And then, you know, they, not in a horrible way, very gently said, look, this is brilliant that you're getting all this work, but you might want to think about whether you either want to stay here and work for us or leave. And I was like, you know what, that's fair enough, because I can't keep getting people to cover me whilst, you know, I'm supposed to be in your studio. And they smoothed the path. You know, they put me in contact with producer managers and producer engineer management companies, and then even after I'd effectively left, I still was doing quite a lot of work for Ireland, just mixing. So it was a great opportunity, and I was fully supported by all the people there.
Oh, that's awesome, actually, because that's not normally the tales you get with stuff like that. It's like
no, it was amazing, you know, because I'd been part of the family there for a good while, and I think they were all just very happy that it was kind of starting to work well, and we're going to be like supportive of that. And some of those people are still in the music business. There's a guy called Darkus Bees who's now president of Ireland worldwide and based in America, but he was just one of the A&R guys and I did lots of work with him at the time.
Oh, that's cool. And a really nice French restaurant / pub around the corner as well, as far as I remember.
There was, yeah. I'm trying to remember the name of it. It was probably way beyond my wage to be able to go there. But yeah, it was nice. Chiswick, High Road, lovely part of London. So.
Yeah, no, really cool. And you mentioned Lamb, because obviously they were... A lot of people then saw them as like a part of like the trip hop sort of scene and all that kind of thing. Do you think that, because obviously you worked with Tricky and did a fair amount of time with him, that whole Bristol sound, West Country sound, trip hop, do you think it was an actual thing that the musicians recognised, or was it just a marketing or journalistic construct that kind of got stuck onto disparate things?
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of that. I don't remember any of those people working towards that or trying to push those kind of genre titles or anything like that. I think that's often just the way marketing and the press like to create a little scene, and it's easier to sort of have a collection of artists that you can lump together. But I don't remember any of those people referencing each other's work.
No.
So yeah, it was good.
Yeah.
All analog as well, which, you know, I look back on it and you think, God, I don't know how we did it. It was just like, it's quite a tortuous process sometimes working on analog. Now, you know, everything's on your laptop and unlimited tracks. But yeah, I mean, there's a Lamb track called Goreshki that has this sort of big string thing on it. And that's just 2 cellos, just multi-tracked. I had to create, I think, 2 string slaves, which are 24-track reels, all synced together with the main beats and vocals, just to create this kind of sound, because we didn't have the budget to go and hire a full orchestra. So it was 2 lovely cellists that overdubbing parts over and over and over again.
Brilliant.
Until we built it up into this thing.
But I love that. I love that thing about, we want an orchestra. We haven't got enough money. Let's just make an orchestra.
Yeah.
And let's get 3 tape machines on the go to make an orchestra.
Yeah, basically, that's what happened. And then I think I had to bounce it all down into sort of stereo groups of, you know, just the pitches. And so there'd be the low pitches on stereo, the mid, and then the very high notes. So I think it's probably 6 or 8 stereo mixes of this collection of multi-track overdubs.
In your sort of general sort of day-to-day stuff, whether you're producing, mixing, doing a remix or an edit for someone, or generally anything we're making music, is there some piece of kit that has become really important to you now that if you didn't have it, you'd go, damn, where is it, or I need it?
I mean, I guess the honest answer to that is probably my laptop. Because that the laptop or a computer, because that ultimately is the kind of central piece that either allows you to do whatever it is you're doing or allows you to share it with whoever needs to. So, I mean, that's a very boring answer, I accept, but either that. In terms of mixing, I have actually, if I move, should I move this? I have this, which is a control surface, and it gives me faders. So I can't really work without faders. I'm so used to being on consoles that, you know, the idea of just being able to move one fader with the mouse at a time just doesn't compute. And so I kind of got in when I realized that I was going to be working on Pro Tools a lot. I was like, okay, I need to find a way of doing this that allows me to still to have that sort of tactile feel that I'm used to working on large consoles, SSLs and Needs and all sorts of things. So that's quite central. Like, I'll still balance on that. With all the faders, touching, you know, the snare at the same time as riding the bass, and not doing things one thing at a time.
Totally.
And so that's still probably harking back a little bit to, you know, working in a studio on a console. So that's very important for me. And I'll still ride all the vocals and bass parts, and that's still done on a fader.
Great.
Not kind of tweaking things with a mouse.
And what make is that desk?
That one is an Avid one, so it only works with Pro Tools, which is essentially what I mix on 99% of the time. Right,
okay. Because what we're doing on all of these, when anyone mentions anything, we're putting links to them as well, so people can go, oh, that's interesting, I want to find. So, you know, just to generate revenue. And all the artists we're talking about, so say you mentioned Tricky and you mentioned Lamb and whatever, we're going to put links to Amazon on all of them. So anyone watching it, so all the stakeholders, the producers, the artists, the songwriters, help to generate a little bit of money, even if it is 5 pence, whatever it might be.
Yeah, I'd say we've all got to club together and push each other's work, and, you know, especially now, I guess, more than ever.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So let's talk about super egos.
Yeah.
I may only be referring to one person, and that's Ian Brody. No. So obviously, probably the biggest artist you've worked with, definitely in her own opinion, would be Madonna. So how did that come about?
That came about because I I know who called me. So it is her producer at the time was a chap called Stuart Price, really super talented English producer, now based in LA, and he had just co-written and produced her Confessions on the Dance Floor album, and was also involved very much in her live shows as a keyboard player, on-stage keyboard player, and band musical director. And Stuart works still. I mean, I haven't spoken to him in some time, but he's still a very committed Logic user, and had done I think almost all the record was tracked in his attic flat in Maida Vale. That album, right, which had hung up the sort of ABBA loop sample that was the big hit on that album. And so they wanted somebody who was kind of able to take those sessions and take charge of running the playback side of things for the tour. And I was recommended to Stuart, and I went to meet him, and we got on really well. And so I did what was her promo tour for that album. And then, I should actually mention someone we have in common who was very much part of that, was Steve Sadelnik, who was the drummer on that tour. And Steve and I had done sessions together in the studio on a bunch of records. I think also Sophie Ellis-Bextor's record and various other things. And so I think Steve was quite instrumental in supporting my suggestion that I be involved. And I think that gave everyone some confidence that this was the right person. So that's how I initially got there. I'd never done a gig of any description because I'd left school and started working in a studio. So I wasn't really in bands or anything like that. And so it was quite a leap of faith on everyone's part, and my own, actually, looking back. I went from having never done a gig to opening the Grammys pretty much in one leap. So that's how that happened. And I loved it because, again, it was she's quite a demanding artist of everybody around her. And the team of musicians, specifically Steve, Stuart, Marcus Brown, Monty Pittman, and all the tech people, Matt Napier and Sean Spuler, they're just wonderful people, and it was just a great environment to find myself in Los Angeles, rehearsing for about 16 weeks or something like that, and just being challenged every day. And she really literally challenges you every day. There's something that she'll want that you have to think really hard about how to make happen.
Yeah, of course, because you've got to make it happen.
Yeah, I mean, there's no excuses there. It's like, it's deliver or leave.
Yeah, it's not like, well, actually, we can't do it because blah, blah, blah. It's like, oh, okay.
Oh, no, there's no can't at all.
Yeah.
So no, it was amazing. And I ended up staying involved in that, even though some of the other personnel left. Stuart left, and I worked very closely with Stuart. And so he wasn't involved going on to subsequent tours with her. But I sort of hung around for about, I don't know, I guess it must have been 6 years.
Right.
Over a period of 6 years, I did a few world tours with her.
Which is pretty cool, really.
Yeah, no, it was great. And it was before kids as well. So it was a lot easier to disappear for 9 or 10 months at a time.
Yeah, of course.
Not so much now.
No one's going anywhere right now.
No.
Anyway. So on a day-to-day level, again, going back to just like a sort of generic sort of thing that you, in your sort of general day-to-day process, is there something that you have to deal with that you think, I really don't want to deal with this because I want to be getting on with the creative side of it, but that is part of the whole thing?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the first thing that springs to mind in that regard is sessions. Often when I'm mixing, I've not been involved in the recording, and so I'll receive files that may not have been edited brilliantly, or there's just a lot of tracks. That seems to be a consistent thing, because there's no limitation in how many tracks or ideas you can put down. Often the kind of through the creative process, there's no self-editing going on, and so I, as the sort of arguably the last person in the chain of the finishing of a recording, end up having to just trawl through a bunch of ideas and make decisions about those things as the mixer. And that takes a long time, especially if it's a song that you've not been involved in the process of creating up until that mix point. And so you're trying to familiarize yourself with all these ideas and then work them into a cohesive balance. So that's quite a tall order often, because you're fulfilling that editing function as well as doing the mixing, which I guess sort of overlap things anyway. The part of mixing is having some form of control over what happens where and making the most of those parts and the vocal, etc. So that's something that, is unique to the world of digital recording. No track sheets. That's something that often people will put down ideas, and so I'll get sessions that just say things like audio 49 and I have no idea what it is, and so you'll just find that 1 point 3 minutes 37 seconds into a song where audio 49 makes an appearance, and you're like, it's a bell tree. Okay. And
then you think, how loud do they want the bell tree, or did they just forget to erase the bell tree, or is this bell tree really integral to 3 minutes 49? I mean, does the song stand or fail on this bell tree right now?
So there's lots of that, trying to decipher. It's like being asked to create food analogies and music. I find are always the best, but it's like having to create a menu, but you're not told what the final item is, but you're just given a massive list of ingredients that have no structure or even measurements to them, and you're just gone, just make sense of this, and you're like, but what are we making? And
there's 6 guitar channels all playing exactly the same thing, and they all sound slightly different. Which one do you like? I'll decide.
I did have that on an occasion. I've got, people who are familiar with Pro Tools will know there's a function called playlists where multiple versions, multiple takes can exist, but not all of them are visible. And unless you know the playlist is there, it's not something as a mixer I would look generally to go through, because you expect people to have made those decisions about what's playing where already. And I did one project where the comments came back and said, you've used the wrong guitar solo. And I was like, well, I used the one that was in the session. And they went, no, you need to go through the 16 playlists that we did. and you're like, well, that's the decision that you should have finished before sending it to me. Now you're asking me to effectively decide what composite of solo you want to have there, and you're not here with me. That's a difficult process.
Absolutely. But made worse by technology.
Things like that.
I mean, that even goes back to, obviously it's worse with the huge amount of unlimited stuff, the playlists, but even when going back to when I engineered the sort of Breakthrough Ocean Colour Scene record before Brendan Lynch and Max Hayes got involved, trying to get the guitarist to put a defined guitar solo down, because he'd have an idea, a stop halfway through, the bit that we said, this is where the guitar solo is going to be, get a different guitar, try another bit, and you'd end up with about 7 different sounds, sometimes on the same channel, because he'd put the guitar down, pick up another one, plug it into the amp whilst you're still tracking. And he'd go, can you edit that together? Well, yeah, I can.
That's the danger, isn't it? Once you say you can, that becomes the expectation.
But the thing is, if you say, I can, but can you just try and learn it and play it in one go? But again, that's the whole thing about sort of, particularly in those sort of instances where people just got lots of ideas. Having I don't know if it's basically, maybe the discipline to edit yourself down is huge, really.
Yeah, I mean that's the key. I think that's one thing that's possibly, I love technology, and I'm not Luddite by any means. I've got all kinds of stuff in software and all that stuff going on, and plugins and everything. But it's that idea of being able to self-edit, being able to be critical. I mean, it's difficult for anyone doing any form of creation. There's always this sort of self-doubt, the sort of nagging voice. I don't think I've ever been happy with any mix. You're always sitting there going, this is awful. Everyone will hate this. and that's kind of the same whether you're painting or writing a song, or there's always that element. And just having enough faith in what you do to be able to determine what's worthwhile pursuing and what's not is a useful thing. It never gets easier, but it's useful to try and cultivate and work on that ability as much as you can.
Yeah. To have self-doubt but enough confidence.
Yeah.
Basically, it's like just a mixture of like...
It's a mix of the two, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, which is why that's why when it comes off and it's so fantastic, that's why it's an art, isn't it? And it's not a science. That's music, as in any of the creative things are there.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. Ali, tell us about Tommy Musto.
Tommy Musto. I don't know.
Neither do I. I think it's on your Discogs list.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh.
I think it's like a late 80s New York house track or something, a club track.
Not me. Late 80s, I was still at school, mate.
That's what I thought. I know he's a child prodigy, but blimey. Hang on.
I know the name, but it's not something. It may, you know what? Maybe it was something that I had done a mix on and he had done a mix on, but it wasn't something that we worked together.
Oh, right.
I've never met him or worked with him.
Right. Okay.
I worked with Giorgio Moroder though.
Oh, Ali, tell us about working with Giorgio Moroder.
Giorgio Moroder is a legend. I mean, just that, that was a real high point. I got recommended by someone, I think it was Marcus Brown, who was the keyboard player for Madonna's band, and Giorgio Moroder was in the UK, and I ended up in a studio with him for about 4 days in Wandsworth. Lovely Wandsworth, the kind of cultural capital of the world. Me and Giorgio knocking out some remixes of tracks of his. In between him, I think he was focused on designing a Italian supercar as well.
Right, okay.
At the same time. And so he was splitting his energies between finalising the plans for this supercar and the mixing that I was doing for him.
In Wandsworth?
In Wandsworth. Amazing.
Yeah. Well, that's it doesn't get more bonkers and brilliant than that, does it?
That's pretty bonkers.
So if you think Tricky and the RZA erasing a track, forcing you to erase a track whilst Tricky's in blind panic of him, and then Giorgio Moroder with you in Wandsworth.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
You've probably been there. Do you remember Razor Studio?
Yeah, I've been there far too many times.
Well, so that's where we were. And it's a tiny little control room, and you sort of step down into it. It's not quite a basement.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was bizarre, but it was amazing. You know.
Yeah.
I loved it.
Yeah. And for anyone watching and listening to this, Wandsworth isn't the nicest part of London, and where this studio is located, it's on an industrial estate, with the rest of the industrial estate being Wandsworth Council's, basically where they take and remove all their waste and rubbish. So it's not as glamorous as you'd expect Giorgio Moroder to be in, which is what makes it even more fantastic.
It was bonkers, yeah. So that was good. But no, sorry, Vaughan, no Tommy Musto stories for you.
Good. Last artist then. You did work briefly with Rufus Wainwright.
Yes.
So how did that one come about?
That was I spent a good while engineering for and mixing for another British producer called Damien Legassic, who is super talented and a lovely man. And he had produced Madonna and REM. He worked for a long time with William Orbit and with Steve Stelnick. And so Damien was fresh off the back of producing a Katie Lang album.
Right.
Which is an amazing record. And he'd just come back to the UK, having been in LA for a while. And we met up, and I think he was a big fan of Lamb's first album.
Right.
And so he very kindly asked me to start working with him, and I think maybe it was the second project that we did together was some tracks for Poses, Rufus Wainwright record, which we tracked at the Strong Room and then mixed in another studio in London. And Rufus was there. He came and played piano and did all the vocals, and it was amazing. And I wasn't very familiar with his work at the time, but his vocals were outstanding. And so it was just a really good experience.
Yeah.
And it's gone on to be quite a well-regarded record. I think it might be the 20th anniversary or something, and he's been doing shows basically, of his back catalogue featuring that album.
Yeah. Yeah, he's the artist I've paid most to see. I don't mean in one single ticket. I mean that I've bought tickets for more than anyone else.
I know he's something else, and he's got a new record out that I just picked up the first couple of singles off. It's a sort of Joni Mitchell tribute type album, not of her songs, but songs inspired by her. Yeah, and it's amazing.
Yeah, he's a lovely guy as well.
He's great. Yeah, he's very funny.
Yeah,
he's just a unique artist performer, and it's there's a few acts like that you just feel quite privileged to have had a passing involvement with.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Again, like Ian Brody.
Yeah, very much so. I had an email from Ian the other day. He's in good form, kind of surviving. He's been doing loads of gigs as well up until this point, but he's good.
We did actually me and Ian did get together towards the back end of last year at
did you?
Zach Starkey's studio.
Oh wow!
Zach Starkey's home studio. So I was getting off a plane. I don't know if we'll keep any of this in, but I got a plane, got a missed call, so I listened to it. It was like, well, that's clearly Zach Starkey by his accent. And he said, hey man, do you want to come down and play some drums? Call me back. I thought, I better call back Zach Starkey. And then he hasn't finished it yet, but he was doing an album for Teenage Cancer Trust, ultimately.
Yeah.
And it's all Mark Bolan songs. So he's got his dad on it, he's got Elton on it, Paul McCartney's on it, loads of people on it. And he's like, I'm going to play drums, you're going to play bass, Ashcroft's going to sing, and do you know Ian Brody? I was like, yeah. He said, he's playing guitar, are you free tomorrow? I was like, okay.
Brilliant.
But he said, I said, well, where are we recording? He said, at my house. We'll do it in my studio. So I presumed he'd have a little home studio set up. Oh, fuck me.
Is it? I've never been there. But I've spoken back on the phone a few times, but I've never worked with him.
It's ridiculous. Do you know State of the Art? State of the Arc in Richmond. It's like that, but bigger.
Wow.
And it's full of the same sort of vintage amazingness. I was like, this is your home studio. Fucking
yeah.
And then Ashcroft did his usual thing. He turned up about 4 hours late, sang the song twice and left.
Brilliant. Yeah. Well, that's what you want from Richard. That's what he's brilliant at. He does that at gigs as well. I just remember when we did that O2 show and he never turned up for the sound check and then threw a song in that we'd never played. You guys had never played.
History with an orchestra.
He did through History, and I remember he announced all of you one by one onto the stage. Brilliant.
Here's a song they've never played.
And then I remember I had to talk poor Will Malone, the legendary Will Malone, through every song because he's brilliant and he's a genius, but just the atmosphere in arena, standing 3 feet behind Steve Warman and Steve Sadelnik was not something that he was very familiar with. So
standing behind a cacophony of super loud guitar and drums, trying to make sure the orchestra is exactly where it should be.
It was amazing. Yeah. That was definitely a good one. I enjoyed that so much. And no Richard for the sound check. Yeah,
of course. Why would he? But that's in a way, I do love that level of trust as well. It's like, on one side, it's like I can't be bothered because I want to save myself for the gig, which I get, and then that relies on trust for everyone else because if it goes wrong, who the audience are going to have the arse with? It's certainly not these other people on stage who then have no idea who they are.
Oh yeah, I remember we also do you remember that he did Lonely Soul that night as well, and that was, I don't know if you knew this, but at the time there was no tracks for Lonely Soul, and me and Sadelnik basically started emailing people And eventually, and I can't remember who it was, but somebody said, "Oh, I was involved with that track, and I think I can saw some of the parts." And so I got a collection of bits, and obviously I had the CD, and then I spent about 4 days in here reconstructing it and remixing it out of these disparate bits of audio, creating new parts, finding samples, because it's a lot of sort of found sound effects in there, choo-choo trains and atmospheres and things. And then he decided to put it in the set list that night, and with the orchestra playing.
Yeah.
So it was like, oh my God, this is just real baptism of fire stuff here. You know, we've never rehearsed this, we've never sound checked it. I did it in my little room, and it's now going to be played on a PA in the O2.
With a 32-piece orchestra in front of 20,000 people. But again, that kind of goes back to, there's no, for some artists, there are no rules, and it doesn't matter how you're supposed to do it. I just want to do it this way. Though. Yeah.
I think he likes the K. He likes the sort of skirting the edge, knowing that at any minute this could all fall apart.
Which I suppose is diametrically opposed from the way Madonna works, which is like 16 weeks of rehearsals. 16
weeks of rehearsal, everything locked down, even the banter between songs is ironed out and nailed to.
Yeah. Brilliant. Wow. Well, Ali, this has been fantastic.
Oh, brilliant. I'm glad that you got something out of it. And can I just also mention, just because it's coming up, there's a new artist whose album I produced. We did most of it last year, and being the very kind of modern record it is because of all the ways that we're all working now, I recorded it all at Real World with Steve Stelnick on drums.
Right. Okay.
It's a new artist called George Ogilvie, I should say.
Right. Okay.
The album comes out next Friday.
Oh. Okay.
And it's probably a year's worth of my life, mixed at Real World and in hotel rooms across America whilst I was touring with Snow Patrol and Ed Sheeran. So it's a kind of very modern record in that it was recorded the sort of conventional way in a lovely studio with musicians, but then, put together and worked on over a fairly extended period in all sorts of environments, tour buses, in hotel rooms and stuff. So it comes out on Friday. I'm just quite excited about it.
So that's George Ogilvie.
George Ogilvie, yeah. Right. It's his debut record. I'll give you a quick... the screen might go blank for a sec, but you'll get a quick look outside.
Magic.
So, bear with me.
That looks very familiar.
So this is my normal habitat. That's this is Real World Studios. That's the big room overlooking the pond. And that glass is the control room.
Yeah, magic. With the stream going through it.
With the stream going through it, yeah. No swan today. The swan's obviously gone into self-isolation.
That's brilliant.
So yeah, there you go.
Magic. And we've even got an outside tour. You're an absolute gentleman.
Yeah, take that, Emre.
Yeah, exactly. Much better than Emre's bedroom.
Right, I'm back.
Brilliant. Well, Ali, thank you so much.
Pleasure. Nice to see you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Ali Staton.